Okay, I think it's probably about time for us to get started. I think we've got a quorum here. So first, let me introduce myself. I'm Juliet Bender. I'm the Vice President of the Lane County Master Gardener Association Board. And I want to welcome you to our monthly seminar series, which we hold every Tuesday, every third Tuesday of the month at 6:30. This event will be recorded and will be posted online. So you can find it later on our YouTube channel. And I would ask that as people have questions, as this talk is proceeding, to put them in the Q&A box. And we will answer those at the end of this talk. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker. Our speaker tonight, who will be talking on digital diagnosis, is Dr. J.W. Pscheidt, and he received his Ph.D. in plant pathology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1985. Since 1988, he has been a professor at Oregon State University as an Extension Plant Pathology Specialist. His principal duties are to lead a statewide extension program related to the diagnosis and management of diseases of all fruit, nut, and ornamental nursery crops. He is also the co-editor of the regional publication, the Pacific Northwest Plant Disease Management Handbook, which those of us that are master gardeners use regularly. So thank you for that. It's an incredible resource for us to use as we answer questions. So let me turn it over to you. Thank you again for being here tonight.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to share the screen and get that correct here. And let's see. One more thing to find, and that's my little, there it is. Very good. I'll flip this up. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending. We'll try to keep you awake tonight and not falling asleep on everything here, but we've got a bunch of things that we're going to talk about in terms of doing things in the virtual world here. My name is Jay Pscheidt, as she mentioned. I work on a lot of different crops. I just don't do the vegetables or the small grains. That's my counterpart, Dr. Cindy Oakham, who works on those. And I'm just going to really quickly ask Juliet if you can both hear and see the slides at the moment. Are you able to see those just fine?
Yes, I can.
Very good. All right. Well, to continue on then. Yeah, and it's just not going to want to move here, which is always very interesting to have that happen to us. So we're going to have to stop and stop share screen and try to figure out how to get it going again here. It's always something interesting that's going to happen. Try sharing this and seeing if this one will work.
Jay, I've had this happen before. If you take your mouse or cursor and kind of hover it down in the lower left-hand corner, there should be some little arrows, the other corner. There should be some arrows that show up that you can click on to forward slides.
They might be hidden by something here. Okay, I'm not seeing them. Yep, there we go. I think I have to have that all the way off there, but that's fine. Anyway, get back on track here. Yes, she mentioned this large book that I work on every year. Annually, we work on this thing. And, you know, for some of you who've only worked on it online, you may not know how huge this thing really is. It's quite a big fat book these days, almost 1,000 pages altogether. But most of you are probably familiar with it online and have seen it this way there. And we cover a lot of different crops in here, all the major diseases that we have to deal with, and maybe a couple minor ones, and all the control tactics along with it as well. So one of the things I wanted to do was for you to not forget what happened in 2020. you see there were some certain things that happened then, you know, we got bragging rights this year, and we're going to go to town with those. So, you know, it took a pandemic to happen, right? So didn't want you to forget about that. We can't call it what we used to call it. We have to call it something different. The platypus boll is one that I've heard before. Anyway, let's talk about plant diseases here. Usually we talk about these in two different types. I try to split them up. These infectious diseases that I play with all the time that can be transmitted from one diseased plant over to the healthy plant. But then there's all these things that people call a diseased plant, the non-infectious diseases that aren't really going to be transmitted from one plant to another. And so if we can get it into these two big groups, we're doing quite well. For the infectious diseases here, we're talking about fungi. There's a lot of different plant diseases caused by fungi, a few by bacteria, lots of viruses that attack plants as well. These little roundworms called nematodes, and there are even plants that attack other plants. This graphic is just to show you what a plant is. This is supposed to represent one plant cell here on the outside of the graphic here. Here's a head of a nematode sticking in here. It's a multicellular creature, has lots of organelles in there. Here's a stylet. That means it's a plant pathogenic nematode. Fungus is a bit smaller. It's also a multicellular creature, but it's thread-like overall. A bacteria, very small, just one single cell. It's about the size of a chloroplast. Viruses, well, there's lots of different viruses, and they're probably depicted here a little too large. Well, I can't even call them organisms. They're really just molecules more than anything else. Here's an example of a fungus that you're probably seeing lately on your strawberries if you've held them too long. Gray mold, if they've survived the slug onslaught, they've probably getting some gray mold on them too. The fungal name is Botrytis. These names that we have for the different fungi comes when you start looking at them from a microscopic level. The fungal world is quite diverse. There's lots of different structures they produce, lots of different spore types and shapes. One fungus might produce lots of different kinds of spores, as it turns out. And this is where a lot of this morphology is how we've named them in the past. There's a little more molecular ways of naming them these days, but that's what's going on. And from the microscopic level, all these things that we're talking about are microscopic, including bacteria, smaller yet. From the unaided eye, about all you're going to see, it looks like snot on a petri plate there. I mean, it's really not that impressive. You got to get a light microscope out or an electron microscope out, and then you're going to begin to see, well, there's not a lot of morphology here. There's just they look like hot dogs, maybe with some hair on them or flagella, and that might be all you see with these bacteria. And viruses, they are so small. This is an electron micrograph. You're seeing tobacco mosaic virus up really close. And yeah, they're not organisms. They're just, it doesn't even have DNA. It's got RNA in there and then a protein coat around the outside. That's it. It's basically infectious molecules is the way to think of a virus. And then, so that was the smallest thing. And now we're going to the biggest sort of microscopic thing, and that's the nematodes. This is a ring nematode. In here, you can see why, yes, it does have a mouth and a stylet, a stomach, intestines, lots of things that you can see, lots of organs in something like this. And then there are plants that attack other plants. This is daughter. It's not the green thing. That's the host plant. The daughter is this spaghetti noodle looking thing here that's kind of coming around and twining around the host plant. But there's other things that attack plants, right? There's the six-legged things called insects. There's the eight-legged things called mites, the no-legged things, slugs and stuff like that. And then, of course, there's those nasty four-legged things that attack my garden. Rats and deer, and boy, they're munching all through all sorts of different things. And then we have all the non-infectious things that we have to worry about when we're diagnosing things. The adverse soil conditions, too much or too little nutrition, adverse weather conditions. Anybody seen that this year? What have we had? We've had ice storms. That was more up to the north. You had yours a couple years ago. And of course, the heat wave that we all know about. Of course, people are putting chemicals on, and there's just so many different things to try to figure out what's causing a plant problem. Why? You got to be this guy to figure out what's going on out there, right? Got to be I don't even know how this thing looks on here. Anyway, I don't think you got to be this guy with all of that. I think you can do it yourself. You just have to have an approach to go after it. And this is where we talk about the the systematic approach to diagnosing plant damage. And it goes through several steps that we teach in the Master Gardener classes. First thing you want to do is identify the plant, of course, and know how it's supposed to look and how it's supposed to appear. And then we look for plant patterns. We look for the damage patterns. You want to do this in a particular order. You want first in the plant community, then in the individual plant, and then on plant parts. You can't quite get all the way with these things. And so we also talk about time development, and that will help you put it into these large categories of whether they are infectious problems or non-infectious problems. And then finally continue to ask questions and gather information in the particular direction that you're led by the answers to these other questions. But of course, what happened last year? SARS. Yeah, everyone got COVID. We had to stay home. We couldn't go out and actually look at real plants. We had to stay home, and so we had to do everything electronically. People were asking their questions and sending us pictures via the electronics, right through the Ask the Expert system was one place where answered my question number went up about 300% last year. These days, it's not Ask the Expert, it's Ask Extension is the thing we're getting. And of course, what are they sending in? Well, they're sending in lots of different kinds of pictures. And so what I did is I decided I'd get rid of all of my slides that I usually talk about with this topic. And I'm only going to show you slides from these Ask the Expert questions from 2020. Okay, this is all during the pandemic. And I'm going to talk about an approach to digital diagnosis. That's what we're going to do tonight. And what you're going to discover is it's not really any different than what it is before. It's still looking for identifying the plant, looking for patterns in the different places here in the community and the individual plant part, looking for time development and asking questions. We really don't have a different way of approaching these digital diagnoses, but we're going to go through these various things. But of course, what do people do? They send you a question, maybe you might get an image with it. And if you do, it's going to be 2C. It's going to be a plant part. They're going to stick that right in the camera and ask, what is it, right? This is the sort of thing. What is it? I don't know. I mean, they don't even know what plant it might be. I could guess that it might be a purple leaf plum. What's causing the holes? There's so many other questions going on here. The questions and types of things we got were so varied. I mean, here's one that I got. I don't know why I got it. It looks like snot sitting on a rock. I don't know where we got this question from, but yeah, okay. I'm not Dr. Snot, folks. Plant problems, that's what we deal with. Oh, and then this one. Yes, this was months after they saw the problem. I think it was in November, this old dried up leaf. What's wrong with my plant? And I think it was an apple plant we finally figured out. Okay, wow, these are the kinds of samples that we're getting these days on Ask the Question. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes they were beautiful pictures. In fact, they were so good that we were able to diagnose them right away. We knew exactly what was going on. It doesn't happen very often, but in this particular case, this person was a photographer. They were very interested in the color balances, the reds, the greens, the yellows, all these different things. And so they were trying to take these pretty pictures and also trying to find out what the problem was in the first place. It's a new disease that has come in several years ago. I'd say about 3 to 5 years ago. It's invasive, and we're beginning to see it show up in a lot of different counties here in Western Oregon. This is Pear trellis rust, and it's just one of these things that you can identify pretty quickly just by sight. And it doesn't happen very often, but once in a while. Understand, this is a two-way street. So people are asking questions and learning things, but I'm learning things too. Just be having an open mind and being able to get and answer these questions. I get a lot of information as well. I did not know that this pear trellis rust was going to attack our Asian pears. This was an Asian pear, and I had never seen it this severe on any pear at all. And so that was very new information for me. It was a new county, new host, and new level of disease that I hadn't known about or had seen in Oregon yet. So Very interesting. I'm learning some things as I'm going through a lot of these questions as well. Of course, the main questions that they tend to give you, or the images, are they send you a picture like that. They're not interested in the in focus blackberry in the background. No, they want to know about the apple limb that's black with white blobs on it. And I can't see what's going on here. It's just have to tell them that it's out of focus. Or here's another one. I wanted to know about the leaf spots on their apple tree, and I can't really see a whole lot here. The pavement that's in focus, I don't think was the focus of their attention, but it's certainly not something we're going to be able to see very much. So yeah, you get a lot of out of focus pictures here. Okay, let's start through this process. Step one, growth and appearance of the identified plant. There are some online ways to identify plants and decide whether it's normal or abnormal, okay? And one of the big ways here is the Department of Horticulture has this website that you can go to that will help you with woody landscape plants, both deciduous plants as well as conifers. So there's two different ones there. So go ahead and find that and see, work through it a little bit. It's not the greatest thing. You will tend to maybe go off on bunny trails, but in general, you'll get down to the genus level, and that will help you continue this process quite well. Or you can have the client use these websites as well. The other good thing that's out there are these not web-based, but phone-based diagnosis programs. This is iNaturalist. This is one that was recommended to me by our herbarium here at Oregon State University, and I've been using it quite a bit. And again, it's not the greatest when you want to work with these really unusual cultivars in the landscape, but native plants, things like that. It does work fairly well. There's more than iNaturalist out there. There's several of these that are out there, and I'm trying to move something out of the way here. That we've got Picture This, Plant Net, Seek, Plant Snap, and Leaf Snap. All these different programs that you can download onto your phone and try to diagnose or try to identify these plants themselves. And you can see there are positives and negatives. Some do very well, some don't do as well on these various things. And it may depend on the stage that plant is in, whether it's flowering or not, as to how well it works. And I got to get my thing working again here. See if we can get it to move. Somehow it didn't like what I was doing earlier. Sometimes that happens. And we'll see if we can get the program to move. Try it on the other side. I love it when these technologies work, and it's not so great when they don't work. Okay, it is wanting to not behave on me, so I'm going to do that. See if that works. And that's not working either, so we're going to say something about a new share. I don't know what that's all about. We'll just give it a try, see what happens. See if we can move forward. Not doing it. Okay, let's hang on. Boy, I just got to stop pointing at things, and that'll be all right. I'm going to redo the share, and we seem to get it working last time. We're going to start up again and see if we can get her going. Not wanting to work. Love it. Oh, there we go. Don't know why it works one way and not another one, but this is another way of identifying a plant. Is at Oregon State University. You can send in real samples to our herbarium, and we run a plant and weed identification service. James Mickley is doing that, and he's very good at that. And during the pandemic, you might have noticed that, hey, yes, you can send in pictures and have him diagnose plants that way. Make sure you get as much of the plant in there as you can, leaf arrangement, flowers if you've got it, things like that. All that will help him identify that. I've used that service many times, and he's very good at that, getting it down to the genus, hopefully species as well. And he also sends some other links too, so you can read up more about these various plants. So this is a service we have in the Botany and Plant Pathology department for you for identifying plants. So once you've got the plant identified, that usually helps pretty quickly. If you don't know what it is, a lot of times you'll recognize the plant pretty quick. Usually your client will know as well. On to step 2, you'll want to look for patterns. And the interesting thing here is we're looking for uniform versus non-uniform patterns. Sometimes we'll talk about random patterns. And the real important part here is the uniform patterns. They tend to indicate these non-living problems like the heat wave that we just had versus non-uniform patterns. We sort of random things that are occurring out there, that tends to indicate the living things such as the fungi, bacteria, insects, things like that that might be causing a problem. You want to make sure you go through it here in the plant community first, the individual plant, and then the plant part, which is kind of hard sometimes because a lot of times all they're going to send you is the individual plant part, right? Here's the question I got about peonies. What's wrong with my peonies? And I'm like, hey, I've never seen that before. I don't know what's going on there. You're kind of looking like trails of an insect. Maybe we've got some leaf miner going on here. All they had to do was back up a little bit, not a whole lot, and give me a little bit wider a picture, which they did. And they sent this in here. I was like, oh, look at that. Off to the left of that peony, it looks like a tree. Yeah, not only is it a tree, looks kind of like a conifer. Oh, look at the ground right at the base of there's white stuff on the ground there. Oh, is your tree oozing sap onto? Yeah, that's what was going on here. The point here is that the wider image, the backing up and looking more at the plant community helps us figure out what's going on. Oh, for this one, I was absolutely certain. I could tell them with 100% certainty that that is definitely a $1 bill. Yes. Oh, the mushroom? No, I don't know what that is all by itself. Now, the interesting thing here is they sent lots of paragraphs about what was going on, what they were doing, and several pictures. The wider picture really helped us out quite a bit here. They talked about this, and now I got an arrow instead of a laser pointer, but that's all right. They talked about cutting trees down in their backyard. I can see a stump here. They talked about putting in new trees. I don't see the new tree. It's kind of off the picture there, off to the right, but I can see a stake and probably a tie down to keep it from moving when they first planted it there. So I can imagine a tree off to that side. But there's my mushrooms are in a semicircle around that dead tree. And so, yeah, we were able to call this armillaria root rot because we had much more information occurring both in text and in pictures here. And that wider view really helped us out in terms of what was going on. Here's another wide view here. I don't know what was wrong with this particular cherry here. That was the focus. And I can see very clearly, here's our cherry. Here's a limb over here. The limb is healthy on this side. It's not doing very well up through the middle. And yeah, it's dead over here, over there. But I can see more with this particular picture. There's a couple of apple trees here to the right, also to the left. There's some conifers in the background. There's some more conifers back here. They all look okay. They didn't say anything, but obviously it's a manicured lawn. They're mowing here. And if you look at the base of that cherry tree down here, you'll see that they've used a little herbicide around the bottom of that. So there's a lot of things you can glean from this picture that might have relevance to this particular situation. We talk about different things that are causing problems on this cherry, but what I wanted to show you was that wider picture tells us a lot of what's going on. In fact, in preparing for this talk, I was able to figure out what the pH of the soil was. The pH of the soil, how can you see that from the picture? Well, if you look down to the lower right here, see if I can point it out there, and we get a little closer picture there. there's a hydrangea down there. I know these mop top hydrangeas are a nice deep blue color in the acidic zone, about 4, 5 pH, and they're pink when they're above 7, 8, right? And so this is kind of in that bluish pinkish zone, around 6 to 7, somewhere in there. That's an okay pH for fruit trees that this person is growing. So a lot of interesting things you can see in these pictures if you take a little more time to look beyond what they're focused on and look in the background, see what else is going on there. In this particular one, they were worried about their dogwood tree. It's here in the middle, wasn't doing well, and they were wondering why that was the case. I can see very clearly, well, I don't know if the lake or sound or whatever the body of water is back there is part of the problem, but I do see a large Doug fir tree on one side of it. There's a deck, and I imagine a house here on the other side of this tree, and it's just not getting a whole lot of sunlight here. And that was probably the main issue of why this tree was not thriving and somewhat declining overall. It's that broader view, that community picture that really helps us get down to the various possibilities that might be going on here. Here's another tree. Purple leaf plum was what I remember. It may or may not be. We have dieback up in the top limbs here for sure. We have some buds that haven't died back here, but I have that wider garden view. The other plants in the garden that you see around the perimeter, they seem to be doing just fine. So it's more focused on that one plant. Oh, and they're gardening. You can sort of take a look and see there's bark mulch down there around these different plants with really good weeders, or maybe they're using herbicides, don't know which. You could talk about these various things, but look down around the base of this tree. There's no bark down around there, and it looks like it's a recently planted tree. So we might need to talk about transplant shock as well. So a lot of things that we can glean from these wider views. I don't know why anyone would plant a dogwood tree that close to their house in front of their window, but that's what's going on in this case. I can't remember what the problem was, but kind of an interesting situation here. The miniature conifer, the boxwoods are probably just fine there. The dogwood, I'm not sure. Okay, might be a plant in the wrong place in time. Okay, let's talk about individual plants. There's a lot we can see with that. A lot of you might be seeing this after that heat wave, but remember, this was not from this year. This is from 2020. It is some kind of water relation problem. Maybe it was too hot, maybe it's not getting enough water. Very obvious when I see the whole plant. I see lots of individual leaves here with this marginal burn here. So the leaf tips, the margins are all necrotic, gone brown. The main veins here, the midrib and the main veins have remained green, very typical of water stress of some kind here. If I look a little bit more, this is a blueberry plant, obviously. I can see some blueberries over here, so a little bit later in the year. They haven't quite ripened up yet. But if you look in the background a little bit more, they seem to all be containerized. Yeah, they're growing these in pots. I may not have said that during the time, but I can see that's kind of blurry. It's in the background. Some look like they're plastic pots over here. This one might be in a wooden type pot, maybe a wine barrel, something like that. But the point here is that you can begin to understand the culture if they haven't said anything about it. In fact, there's a lot of, I don't know if these are weeds over here. It might be that there are some watering issues. They either didn't water, or if they are watering, maybe there's some problem with the media where it is becoming hydrophobic. And when they water, the water goes to the sides, down the end. Maybe it's just not wetting the interior of that media where most of the roots might be at, and that might be the reason for this. But the point here is the pattern on the individual plant is pointing us toward the direction of water stress of some kind. Again, this is one where I'm glad they didn't send me just a leaf with holes in it and wonder why they had these holes. This is a plum tree, and we can talk about shotwell disease, which is a fungal problem here. It's not all the leaves that have it, but I can, again, in the background there, I can see a little bit more that it doesn't look like your typical backyard. In fact, it looks like more of a commercial orchard than anything else. And so we could talk about that with this person as well. It might be a hobbyist. A lot of times these hobbyists can get quite intense like this and look like a commercial orchard. But in this case, we're looking at the whole plant, and that is helping us figure out what might be the problem, looking for the patterns on that individual plant. This is peach leaf curl on a peach tree. That's not really why I wanted to show this to you. There's lots of peaches out there with peach leaf curl. What I wanted to show you was more of the background type stuff here. There's a fence. Yeah, I mean, you can see the fence pretty easily, but right behind the tree, do you notice a gate? In fact, if you look at the ground, it looks like that gate is very well used. There's a lot of traffic going through there. That could be an issue with the plant that you're dealing with. It may or may not be. I'm trying to get you to look at the background here. Also, notice the neighbor's well, house or garage or whatever is really close to the fence there, and there's a downspout there. And that in wet years, that could be an issue if that downspout is draining on the other, really close on the other side of the fence. A lot of times people put up blinders and it's like they don't think beyond the fence. I want you to think on the other side of the fence as well in this particular case. Here's one here. They didn't tell me there was a fence there, but I think there really is a fence there, and it happens to be late in the day that they're taking this picture. You see all those lines there of the sunlight kind of shining through the fence? Yeah, in fact, this single plant here, it's obviously potted. That tells us a little bit. There's burnt leaves here up at the top. Remember, this is from 2020. This is from our heat wave in 2021. The lower leaves seem to be okay. It's probably getting a lot of sunlight on the tops of that plant, and there's probably some water stress on this one as well. It's interesting, I have a lot of water stress plants from 2020. There's probably a ton of them coming in from 2021 as well. And looking for patterns on individual plant parts is also helpful. Not the only thing you want to do, but you can see in this case, I don't just have one leaf, I have multiple leaves. And there's, again, that marginal burn and necrosis between the main veins here. And again, that's indicating some sort of heat stress in this particular situation when I look at individual plant parts. Here's another individual leaf. And the thing that brings up in my mind when I look at this is herbicide use. That kind of restricted growth, the rolling and curling of the leaf. Now, there could be some insects here that are doing that, and I would advise them to unroll the edge of that leaf, look for insects in there. They might not know the difference between an earwig and an aphid, but at least they can look for that sort of thing and maybe rule something in or out for that particular problem. Of course, when you talk about herbicide, oh, I've never put on an herbicide, never do I. Well, of course, it might be the neighbors. They might be putting on something volatile that has drifted in. They all need to consider those things as well. And this one was an interesting one too. The pattern kind of tells me a little bit about this one. They were wondering about the black spots on the underside of their Oregon grape, and they were really curious about that. They knew they weren't insects. They weren't crawling around. They were just staying put. They weren't scale insects or anything like that. But they couldn't quite figure out what was going on here. Because it's on the underside of the plant, I know that there's something called the artillery fungus. So I asked about if there was a compost layer down below these plants. The artillery fungus will shoot its spores out, kind of like our military artillery, and it shoots its spore off, and it's sticky so that when it hits something, it'll stay stuck to that. And in this particular case, it's on the undersides of these leaves here. And so that pattern is helping me to get towards that kind of a diagnosis here on the individual plant part. And then here, the grapes, there's a lot of grapes, a lot of berry diseases on individual berries that you might consider in this particular case, knowing that it's here from the Pacific Northwest. But what you might not see, you might think it's a random occurrence here on these in this berry cluster, but you need to key into the fact that you're looking at all the damage, not only in this picture, but there's some clusters in the background. They're all on the same side. Yeah, and we may be another situation here with heat stress, sunburn injury is quite possible for this one as well. And that pattern on one side helps us go to the abiotic aspect here. Okay, so time development is the other aspect that we want to look at as well. Does it happen all at once, which is very typical of our abiotic problems, like our heat wave that we had? Everything burned pretty quickly after that. Or is it getting worse with time? Are you seeing more and more of it as the weeks, months, or years go on? That tends to indicate insect or disease or some sort of living problem as well. The pictures I got that tell me about time development, you can sort of see in this picture here. I can simply imagine what this looked like when they first planted it. They have a nice, it must have been a lovely little planting here with these cement pavers around the edge here, right? I think a lot of them are missing at this particular point. And they probably planted a nice little tree here in the middle, but they forgot to do several things. Here I can see lots of girdling roots. These roots are starting to strangle that plant as the tree begins to grow and the roots begin to grow. Yeah, they're going to start running into each other and causing some girdling. There's also a bad branch angle here. And that bad branch angle will, again, you have this occluded wood where it will just keep pushing each other away as time goes on, as they continue to put on girth on there. If they were really up close here and just showed me the brown oozing or the black oozing, I might think about Phytophthora problems that occur like this with irrigation. That it might be on the tree. I don't know if they have irrigation here or not, but this wider view helps talk about the time development here. We can talk about ways to correct it, but really a lot of the problem went way back at the beginning when they planted it. There's some things they can do about watching for problems on the tree later on, but eventually that tree's probably going to need to come out, and that's something we need to inform them of. This was the second picture I got. This wasn't the first one I got about their dogwood trees. I think it's kind of interesting here. I'm showing this first because this is the situation. There's the new plantings here. It's in a yard, backyard. I'm not quite sure what's up with the concertina wire there. There's obviously something beyond that berm in the background. I don't know if it's a irrigation canal. That might be one thing, or an airport might be another thing that's going on there. I really don't know. I didn't ask about it, but this is what it looked like when they first planted it in the springtime. And then later, when they're actually, the first picture I got, and they were asking about what's wrong with my dogwood. Yeah, there's a lot of drought stress there, and you can see that they're not irrigating the grass at all. The only thing green really is, what is that? False dandelion, probably. I'm surprised they don't have a gopher problem back there. Oh, that berm in the background there, all brown. Yeah, that's a lot of no irrigation going on here. Very little water. I know they say dogwoods are drought tolerant, but maybe not that much. They could use a drink of water during the summer. No question about that. Okay, step 4, asking questions and gathering information. You know, with these pictures, I hope you're getting the idea that there's a lot more information there than you might think, and that you can look a little deeper in those pictures and find out more about what's going on your own. This is the picture I was contemplating. Well, okay, this is a nice individual plant. Maybe I could use it for the community. Maybe on the individual plant, I could show that. The client was worried about the maple here in the middle. It's got a lot of burned up leaves on here. There's some good ones on top here that you can see. Yeah, I could see it's a garden situation. There's a rock wall here. Oh, there's a hose down at the bottom here. So it was probably getting some water, maybe late. I don't know what was going on in that particular case. But what I wanted to show you was what you could do with a picture like this. And I want you to notice the stop sign in the background. See that on the right side, that stop sign? A little closer look here. You can magnify these on you. And oh, this is a residence at the corner of T and Walnut Street. I knew the county. It was up in Washington, and you can go to Google Earth, and you can find the area where T and Walnut come together. Or you can go find and get a really broad view of what's going on. I didn't know they were next to the Puget Sound over there. That was kind of interesting to see. That may or may not have an impact on what's going on there. But there's even more that you can do. If you look way down there at the bottom right corner, way down here, so there's that little figure of a person. It's what we call street view. And we can actually go right down to street view and get a whole different angle on what's going on at this particular house. That tree was on the inside of that fence here. And so there's that tree right there. It's a few years earlier. Remember, they're asking the question in 2020. And this street view, they do give you a date. If you look down here, it says October 2018. And it looks like that tree is okay. And you can zoom in on that and take a look at that. But the idea here is you can find out a lot more about the situation without even asking questions. You can go search that on your own. This is all public information that's out there. You probably go find your own residents as well. Just another example of how you might use Street View. We did this for this is more of a commercial sample where we're looking for, we did a virus survey. I had a graduate student who was looking for cherry viruses. And as it turns out, we were looking for any kind of viruses that were out there. This was in the Dalles area where they grow a lot of cherries. And we actually found this particular tree here, gnarly looking tree, not looking very thrifty, lots of bunchy leaves, dead and dying leaves, poor parts of the plant. There were lots of other symptoms here. We found a particular virus, cherry leaf roll virus. That's its abbreviation. And it was a new find for Oregon. We had never seen it before. This is in 2016, as it says there. Well, yeah, we could use that. This was actually next to the street. This is a view of Google's car. They have all the camera all mounted on the top of it there, and they just run this thing down the streets, getting all these pictures. And we could see that in 2012, that tree looked just fine. So in 4 years, it got the virus and began to decline to a point where it wasn't had many cherries at all. In fact, there's a tree over here that's just a stump in 2016. Yeah, this is a tree killing disease. And we could see that in 4 years, that was the problem on these very old trees that were sitting in the Dalles. So yeah, a lot of information that you can glean online that you may not have realized yet. So if you've fallen asleep, or if your neighbor has fallen, wake them up, nudge them a little bit. This isn't the same slide that I showed before. I do want to give you some pointers on how to do digital diagnosis. If you get these questions by picture and they give you some information, here's the various things that I go through when I'm answering these various questions. The first thing is a bit controversial. I spend as much time answering as they did asking. If they just ask, what is it? And they give me an out of focus picture, I'm going to say, it's out of focus, I don't know. And I'm going to move on to the next question. If they give me paragraphs of what's going on in the garden, if they send me lots of different pictures of the community view, up close view, all that kind, I'm going to spend a lot of time with them for sure. No problem with that. Some people might spend more time with the simple questions. I will in certain cases if I know what's going on or have a little more inkling of what's happening. But anyway, move on to number 2 here. I like to explain what I'm seeing in the picture, kind of like what I did today with you. There's a lot of different things you can see in the picture. Use your own words to describe what's happening. Do you see irrigation in the picture? Do you see cankers, necrosis? Use those big words that they might not know about, but that will help them when they're reading other material to understand the problem that they might be using. So basically telling them back again, if you get it wrong, they'll tell you, okay? And that's okay, because they'll say, oh no, that wasn't what I was focused on. I was focused on this other thing. And then you can get on the right page there with them. As long as you are both on the same page, that's going to help a lot. And telling them that what you see will be important. And then I go through the possibilities. Well, it could be this, could be that. Most of the time it is going to be 4 or 5 different possibilities. Could be, if you don't see clear patterns, it could be biotic, could be abiotic. You just have to go through the various possibilities for them, and they can continue the diagnostic process themselves. You might tell them, well, if it's this, you might also look for, And these are the things that you can say in your reply back to them. I also like to give them more information to read, section out of the handbook. If it's not out of Oregon State University type information, if you're searching on things, use university at the end of your search. So, yellow leaves on some plant, university, you might bring up a little more quality pages for them to read, or for you to even read, and kind of get away from some of these fly-by-night gardening sites that might not give you a whole lot of information. So yeah, giving them more information to read, quality information, will help quite a bit. And then of course, letting them know that they can ask more questions, send more pictures, especially if they're out of focus. Tell them it's out of focus. Send me an in focus picture. I don't know what's going on with that. I'm from the old generation where we used film, and every click of the shutter cost money, right? You had to develop the film, you had to print the pictures. If you like the pictures, I mean, that all cost money. These days, you can take a bazillion pictures and just eliminate the ones that you don't want, right? And give us the ones that are in focus. Anyway, let them know that they can send more pictures. And with that, I'm going to end it and open it up for questions and see what things that you might have on your mind. And at this point, what I'm going to do is stop sharing once these things stop monkeying around here. Okay, let's stop sharing and get to some of the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I just wanted to say how impressed I am as to what you all see in one picture. I am really impressed by everything that one can look for. And it really is true. A picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
So I want to remind people to put questions in the Q&A box. Let me just start with the question, what do I do about rust on my hollyhocks?
Rust on hollyhocks, yes. Well, they're going to be what do we call that? Not a woody perennial, but a perennial, that herbaceous perennial. And so when those die down over the winter time, and they don't always, if you have a malva that's not actually a hollyhock, they may not die completely down. But during the dormant season, removing that debris away will help reduce the amount of spores that might be in the air. There are some other things that you can do as well. That's probably the primary one. And you can look up in the handbook. That's your assignment, is to go look in the handbook for hollyhock rust, which you can find. And it will go through the various cultural controls as well as chemical controls. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what all the different chemicals are registered for hollyhock. There might only be 1 or 2 home available chemicals. You will find those in that little H in the box after the chemistries. What that indicates is a product that is in small packaging that you could get at like Home Depot or your garden center, somewhere like that. The others are more for commercial operators. So those are the various things that you can look up, and maybe you can post online on your question and answer. Then go online, take a look for that, see what you can find, and let us all know. I could look it up too in my book, but I'm going to answer some questions.
You mentioned obviously that you edit the P&Ws each year. That seems like a major undertaking. How do you go about that? And do you just look for things that are new or that need to be added, or how do you go about making those edits and changes?
Well, I'm constantly looking for new information that's going to go in there. So the example I gave during my talk was on the Pear trellis rust, right? And so I could edit that. Now I knew this last editing cycle, oh yeah, Asian pear, we need to put that down, and it can be severe in some situations. So, those are some slight edits that go in there. There are new diseases that are popping up all the time. I just talked about this before we opened it all up to everybody, but a new rust disease on blackberry that we hadn't really seen before. That's very common back east, but we don't have it here. well, I guess we do have it here now, and we're asking people to look for it. So that's a new section that's going to go into the handbook. Look over journals, look over trade journals, as well as professional ones, my travels and various things I see. Also read all the labels that we need to keep up with those and make sure, see what label changes have occurred. Some of the home labels don't change quite as much as others, but the commercial labels usually do. So be they chemistry or be they biologicals, usually there's more information to glean off of those. We try to get the more important information into the handbook. I also have a lot of help, right? So I do all the ornamentals and fruits and things like that. And I got Cindy Oakham, who does the vegetables and small grains. And I'm constantly asking my counterparts both here in Oregon and Washington and Idaho, also a little bit in British Columbia, and I'll tag some people in other states as well as to, hey, what about this? And what do you see that, just ask questions and get more information about maybe something I'm a little more unfamiliar with or that. So these questions are always helpful to help guide new changes in the handbook.
Well, we definitely appreciate all the effort that goes into that. There is a question. There are so many fungi. Should we provide very exact diagnosis or general?
Well, the devil's always in the details, okay? So on the one hand, it helps to have as close to a diagnosis as you can get. Digitally, it's going to be hard to get to that one thing. But you'll have to give them a variety of stuff. Sometimes if it's, for example, the other example I like to use, the other side of the coin, is say a canker disease on apples. So it's an apple tree and you see a definite canker on there. Well, there's like 3 or 4 different things that can cause a canker, a plant disease on apple. And you may not need to get to the exact one, because if you start looking at the control tactics, they're all pretty much the same. You get rid of you saw it off, you get rid of it that way, you put on protectant fungicides, the various things like that. You'll actually notice if you go to all the different canker diseases on apple, the control tactics are virtually the same. So in that particular case, you could be fairly general and still give them very helpful information back as to how to manage their particular problem.
There is a comment on the hollyhocks, just that there are resistant hollyhocks.
Okay, so there are a few of those as well. That would be good to look for then. You might be able to plant some new plants here that won't get it. That's always fun to do.
Question, what sources do you recommend for double checking the ID of a plant or insect?
Yeah, for the insect, I'm not going to be as good about that. For the plant ID, you could do a couple of things. So if you've got your cell phone and you're doing the iNaturalist, right? And you come up with something and you're not quite sure whether that's it. You could take that picture. You could then send that to the herbarium and say, hey, my iNaturalist says it's this, that, and the other thing. Do you agree? And so that'd be a good way of double checking on that. You don't have to take the picture. You can take a picture that was sent to you and send that through these programs as well. And that might be a thing that you may not have realized. You can also ask other master gardeners, other people online. There's a lot of ways that we can glean information. Now, of course, it might be the case of the blind leading the blind. They all think it's this one thing. The only thing that comes to my mind real quickly is the plant Dusty Miller. There are 5 different genera that have the common name Dusty Miller. And so you may or may not get the right one there. Anyway, there are ways to double check. Yes.
Another question, with climate change, if date palm fruit trees become viable here, what new diseases and insects can we expect?
Well, if they haven't been here very long, you might get away without any insect or disease problems. That might be the really neat thing about that. I don't know if this is going to become the Central Valley of Oregon or not, but after this heat wave, I think a lot of people are thinking that we'll just have to deal with the climate that we're dealt with each year. It's going to be quite variable, and there are people trying olives. There are people trying almonds. I have had almonds that have been grown in Southern Oregon. It was interesting to see those trees. I don't really see them anywhere else, but maybe you can get away with it. I suspect that there's going to be years that we will get very cold and these trees will have a lot of problems. So you might get away with it for several years, but be forewarned.
Okay, another question. Is there a sequential set of problems that occurs with heat and water stress? Does insect damage follow other damage, like fungal or bacterial?
Yeah, trying to figure out, so there's not necessarily one thing that's going wrong with a plant, especially as we get later in the year, you might have multiple things happening on the same plant. So yes, we've had a lot of heat stress. I had a question today that was asking about scab on apples. He's wondering about the scab on his apples. Didn't send a picture. I asked him to send a picture. Yeah, it was sunburn on all his apples that he had there. So there's the sunburn. That's now a damaged plant part. We can have other organisms jumping into that tissue, be they disease organisms or insects as well. There are shot hole borers. There are other types of insects that will attack weakened plants. So that is one thing to look at. You want to try the best you can to get at what the original problem might have been. So there are a lot of times we will talk about in, say, in your handbook about that some diseases are encouraged by drought conditions, or some insects are encouraged by drought conditions. So make note of those. We might begin to see a lot of those shock effects from our heat wave in the future here, not only this year, but in future years as well. I hope that answered the question.
Let's see there. If anybody else has any more questions, just put them in the Q&A box. There's one more here. What else is confused with sun damage?
What else might be confused with sun damage? Understand that there's multiple things going on with the plant. I mean, you have to understand how a plant is growing to begin with, right? So we have a plant, a tree, for example. It has roots. It's bringing up water through the roots, up through the trunk, out to the leaves. And if you don't have functional roots, you know, if you have a root rot problem, yeah, you're going to see heat damage above because it's just not able to get enough water up to those leaves. The same if you have a canker disease on the trunk or on a limb, you're not getting water through that particular area to the leaf, and so you'll see that as well. The flip side of that, of course, is that, yeah, it was hot, and it was hot for a long time, and if there wasn't enough water in the ground, there's just that heat load on those plants, and they're just going to burn. The stomates have shut down. They're not going to be transpiring, but they just cannot keep up with that heat demand that's on them. And so, you know, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. You know, is it the heat? Is it the water? I know that a lot of my garden, as well as our farm, did well. They anticipated this heat wave quite well. We watered things up as best we could, especially plants that are shallow rooted, like blueberries, rhododendrons, things like that. Getting that water on just before it hit would have helped them quite a bit overall. So when you say heat damage or heat wave, it'll be a combination of factors that are occurring there, and exactly what's going on might be difficult to get at. Oh, I had heat damage, but my neighbor did. Well, maybe the neighbor watered and they didn't, you know, that sort of thing.
There's a question, I'm not sure I understand it. It's mitigation techniques, liquid seaweed. Do you know what that means?
What are we mitigating? Yeah, that's what I'm
for heat stress. Oh, for heat stress, I guess.
For stressed plants.
Heat stress, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm aware of this. If there's a salesman out there trying to push something out there, I haven't really heard of anything like that. Generally, for heat stress, we're trying to do, if you're trying to do a preventative type thing, you're putting whitewash on, you're putting on white materials, sun blockers, anti-transpirants, things like that. After the fact, sorry, when you have dead plant tissue, it's not going to come alive again. You're going to have to encourage that new meristematic area to produce new plant tissue. So yeah, once that, and that's something a lot of people are going to have trouble with, because a lot of our clients are going to want to make it all healthy again, make it all well again, and it's going to be more of a next year you've got another chance. That's I'm sorry, but that's sort of the way you got to go with it.
Well, I think that's all our questions. I want to thank Dr. Jay Pscheidt for being with us tonight, and I also want to thank our plant diagnostic group for finding you and making you available to us tonight.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
And I just wanted to mention that our next seminar will be August 17th, and it will be, we'll have some staff from the Mackenzie River Trust to talk about river restoration projects that they're doing in the Upper Willamette watershed. So hope that you can join us in a month for that. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Pscheidt, for your willingness to speak and your wonderful presentation.
Good night, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Lovely evening.
Okay, good night.
Thanks, Juliet. Thanks, Jay. Good night.